We've seen Augustus, the first emperor, and I'd like to just very quickly introduce you to another emperor, and his name is Hadrian. Hadrian comes to power in the year 117. He's going to rule for about 20 years, and the deal is he does this at the height of Roman power. The territory, again, let me take us around the ring of land that encircles the Mediterranean and runs all the way up to the border with Scotland. The Mediterranean back in the day used to be referred to as the Roman Lake, indicating the great expanse of the empire and the power of it. The statue of Hadrian, nevertheless, reminds us that even in the best of times, there were problems that had to be dealt with. This particular statue was found in 1975 in Israel, and it depicts Hadrian as a commander, a general, really. He's wearing the breastplate of a general who was in charge of putting down a rebellion in the region that had been inhabited by the Jews. The Middle East, as we would call it today, the territory right in here, and I think this is Jerusalem. This territory had been absorbed by the ancient Romans, and there were conflicts. The conflicts occurred because of religion. The Jews, like the later Christians, are going to be monotheists throughout a great extent of time. The Romans, of course, are polytheists. The Romans were actually pretty liberal with their subjects and told their subjects that you can worship in any way that you want. If you want to, worship your God. But you've also got to worship ours, because it is treason not to support the state gods. In addition to that, the state gods included the dead emperors, because the emperors became gods. They became deified at the moment of their death. This was not something that the Jews could do lightly, and as we'll see later on, it's not something that the Christians can do either. Consequently, there were a series of rebellions, and it is under Hadrian that the great diaspora of the Jews takes place. This breastplate then shows Hadrian, the Roman emperor and general, basically putting down the rebellion of the Jews. It was good propaganda, essentially. It's another emperor image, and it shows the emperor as a victorious figure. This is also based upon the ancient Greeks. If you look at the face of Hadrian, you're going to see that it's incredibly calm, and that refers back to 5th century BCE style and the attitude of the ancient Greeks that it is important to control your emotions. Perfect body, perfect mind. And Hadrian is shown with that kind of perfection in reference to the ancient Greek world. He did rule for about 20 years, and in that time period, to his credit, I think, he traveled around his empire. He wanted to know the people. He wanted to see firsthand what the problems were. But Hadrian also loved art and architecture, and he was heavily influenced by some of the materials that he saw. Despite the great power of the Roman Empire in the 2nd century, and that is the period that Hadrian is ruling, so we are now in the 2nd century, it became necessary from Hadrian's perspective to actually build a wall, a rather great and imposing wall. You're looking at some of its remains right now. It is a wall in a very, very Roman approach, where the Romans found the shortest distance to separate what we would count today as England from Scotland. In other words, to put up a wall to block out and to control access from the people to the north, and those people, according to Roman interpretations, were uncivilized barbarians. It is very Roman in its approach in terms of controlling access and controlling space, and it would indeed be very Roman to think that putting up a wall would kind of solve this problem. This was, however, an impressive endeavor by Hadrian, and I would like you to take a look at the video from Smart History that covers Hadrian's Wall. In addition, I would like you to take a look at One of the most important of all monuments that survives from the ancient Roman world. You do have a Smart History video of this, and it is the Pantheon. It's located in Rome, and when you visit Rome, you should be able to see this particular building. It has a temple front that would have been approached by a forum, and that temple front looks very ordinary, very much like the temple structures we've seen in the past, complete with pediment. But as the Smart History video will tell us, that's not the shape of the building at all. When you go in, it is actually a domed circular structure. So you are surprised by the interior space as you enter. On the interior, we have a huge hemispherical dome with a diameter of 142 feet. That also means that it's up in the air 142 feet. The oculus, or the eye, has a diameter of 30 feet. This is, again, very Roman. It's massive, it's big, it's grand and imposing. The thing I wanted to point out to add to what the Smart History video has to say is that this is also a marvel of Roman engineering. The only way that this was possible was with the use of concrete, because we have a domed ceiling located right here that has no internal supports. So what the Romans had to do was find a way, using concrete, this very practical material made out of sand and lime and water, that you can create in a recipe and vary the recipe, throwing in some substantial rocks or stones to strengthen your mixture, but you can play with it like you can with a cake mix, and that's exactly what the Romans did. They did create very, very solid and very heavy walls on the bottom. When they went up into the dome area, we're still thick, but we begin to taper, getting thinner and thinner and thinner until we hit the oculus. The oculus, of course, is an empty space, and it lightens the load of the structure. In addition to that, however, what the Romans do as they begin to move into this portion of the concrete mix, they actually lighten the concrete mixture. Instead of putting in chunks of rocks to give solidity to the mix, they throw in pumice, which is, it looks like sponge, but it is stone. It would still give grit or grab to the mixture, but it would indeed lighten the load. This is a structure then that again references the genius of Roman engineering. It does rain in through the oculus, and it is 30 feet in diameter, so it rains a lot. But it wasn't a problem. And the reason for that is the Romans are notoriously skilled at creating good drainage systems. The images on the lower portion, and this is my hand, so it gives you a little sense of scale. These are holes that would allow the water to drain from the floor into the area below, so that the water could leave the building. So yes, the rain falls on the floor, but relatively quickly it is removed through the drainage system. Very, very technically skilled and competent, the Romans were able to overcome a problem with a big hole in the ceiling. Again, this would originally have been surrounded by a forum. The forum would have been on axis, and it would have led us to the single entranceway to the Pantheon, the temple dedicated to all of the gods. My last object in this talkie is the statue, the equestrian statue on a horse of Marcus Aurelius, and it is 758 in our textbook. I want to supplement some of the things that the Smart History folks are giving you, because this is such an important work of art. For one thing, it's huge. It stands 11 feet 6 inches, so it is much larger than life size. It's rather grand and it's rather imposing, which was its goal as a work of propaganda, showing us Marcus Aurelius, the triumphant emperor. We are talking about a time near the end of the 2nd century, and in this period, Rome is still very strong and powerful, but it's beginning to have increasing problems on its borders. We think that this statue was to commemorate success on campaign of Marcus Aurelius. He did have to deal with, quote-unquote, putting down the barbarians. The barbarians in the ancient Roman world were people who were not Roman, people who were encroaching on the borders of the Roman Empire. It is in fact believed that originally there would have been a second statue, and it would have been a barbarian, and it would have been under the hoof of the horse, a defeated barbarian, in which case what we're seeing is one of the most important aspects of power that an emperor had, and that would be over the command of life and death, because what he's doing is granting clemency to the defeated victim that is under the hooves of his horse. It shows that he has the capacity, the strength to do this, but it also shows his benevolence. At the same time, he moves his arm into space, so he connects very much with us. It is therefore an open composition. It is commanding. It is also made out of bronze, which is an incredibly expensive material. And on top of that, it was gilded. You can see a little bit of the gold on the surface that remains on the sculpture today. That would have made this look very regal, very royal, and would have conveyed the association of bronze, a rich material, with the elite, and of course, specifically with the emperor. A couple other views. It is inside a museum. It used to be outside, and it was losing some of its gilding being out there. This particular statue, because it's the only one to survive from the ancient world, an equestrian statue, a guy on a horse, it's particularly important to us. It became a prototype for the Renaissance when the tradition was picked up, and every single equestrian statue in the United States today can hark back to this. So it is a source for everything that follows. Let me just show you one. This is located in front of the Philadelphia Museum of Art in Philadelphia on Aikens Oval. And it might be hard to believe, folks, but this is a statue of George Washington. I'm not sure that George Washington really would have appreciated being modeled on an image of a Roman emperor, but it shows him elevated on a horse and looking ever so brave and grand and powerful because of that prototype. A couple more views. One of the points I would like to make is that when an emperor would come into office, an artist would make a likeness of him. The decision would be made if this was acceptable, and then it would be duplicated. These likenesses could be spread around the empire, shared with the Roman people, who were unlikely to ever see the Roman emperor in person. So these statues would convey the idea, the way in which the emperor himself wanted to be viewed. The marble piece in the middle is another version of Marcus Aurelius, and we have next to it on the far left at the bottom a detail of the face of the equestrian statue. I think you can see that they're pretty much following the same pattern, the same conceptual design and appearance. So that if you see one, you're going to recognize Marcus Aurelius in another, a highly effective form of propaganda typical of the ancient Roman world.